Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Welcome back to Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. DR, the book guy here, Dennis Rimmer, with us now from way back in Newfoundland, or over or under, or however you get there. Elisabeth de Mariaffi, she's the author of at least 4 books right now, including the short story collection, How to Get Along with Women, The Devil You Know, Hysteria, and the one I have in front of me is The Retreat. So, Elisabeth, first question, yes, how do we get along with women?
Such a good question. That was my first book, that book of short stories, and I was, really daunted at the time. I was writing like a really long form narrative, like a novel. So I wrote a book that I think really thought a lot about power. And it had a lot of really interesting women characters in it. And I think, in some ways I've continued that theme in my novels. But the short story form, allows you so much room to play and experiment in a way I think that I sort of miss now that I write novels, which, tend to be a little bit more, I guess, restrictive.
I've heard from a lot of people who want to become writers or try to be writers that, I could write short stories, they're easy. But that's not quite true, is it?
I think it's harder. I think
Yeah.
It's harder to write a really fine short story. And if we look at some of the finest short story writers that we know, I often say Alice Munro can do more in a 30-page short story than most novelists can do in 300 or 400 pages. Like the level of impact that she brings into one story and how much is just packed in there is just astounding to me. And I go back to her stories over and over again.
So speaking of going back, let's go back to your early life. Tell us about how it all started. Where were you born and raised, went to school, and when did you start writing, thinking that you might make a career of this? Tell us about that.
For sure. So I was actually born in Toronto and grew up there, and lived in Southern Ontario, really in one way or another for a long time. I went to university in Guelph, which is a lovely university town, and then actually moved back there after university because I missed it so much, and I lived there. I had my kids when I was pretty young, and so that's kind of where I raised them for the first few years. So while my kids were really little, I was trying, I always wanted to write. And I wrote, the shorter the better in some ways because I only had so much time. So I wrote a lot of poetry, and I also participated in the community editorial board for the local Tour Star paper, which is called the Guelph Mercury, and wrote editorials for them. And wrote, freelance here and there for magazines in Toronto. But it wasn't until my youngest went to grade 1 that I decided that I really wanted to invest in that. And so for me, I decided to do an MFA, a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. And it was the right choice for me. It's not the right choice for everybody. But it definitely was the right choice for me because it gave me a sort of an instant community of writers that I got to share my work with. It gave me deadlines that I had to take very seriously because I was involved in a graduate program. And that is really where I started writing fiction, because up till that point I'd been writing poetry, and they actually let me into the program as a poet. But you have to take another genre of writing. They don't let you just do the one thing for the whole time. It's a 2-year program. So I took a course in short fiction and just fell in love and just, became really obsessive about writing, because I hadn't had a chance to do anything like that in a bigger way, because I had these small kids at home, and I was so consumed with them for so many years. So that really, that's where I started writing fiction. And so I would have been in my early 30s then. And from there, when the program ended, I went off to the Banff Centre for the Arts and did a 2-week residency there. And I booked that, it was about 4 or 5 months after I graduated the program, and I booked it far in advance because I thought I don't want to graduate from this program and then just sort of fall away from my writing practice. And so this gave me something to sort of, so that the sort of goal setting, the always a new goal, for me has really worked very well.
And now you're in St. John's, Newfoundland or environs. How'd you end up there? Any special stories about that one?
We were, so I guess in 2008, I left my first husband and I had moved back to Toronto with my kids, and we were in Toronto for a few years, which was great. And we were already starting to think about moving to the East Coast for a variety of reasons, and one of which is community, and one of which was cost of living, because I did want to be a writer, and that's something you really have to think about. And then I met a poet who lived in St. John's. And so ultimately I moved here for love.
Ah, of course, the best reason. We're talking with Elisabeth de Mariaffi as I collect my thoughts. The Retreat, your latest one about a dancer who goes to, I'm assuming it's a fill-in for the Banff Centre of the Arts, because it's a retreat she goes to in wintertime, and a storm happens and there's things going on that may or may not be true, and it's all about a dancer who goes there. So how did you find out about what it was like to be a dancer, for a professional type dancer?
Yeah, well, I am not a dancer of any kind. In fact, I'm a klutz. So I had to do my research on that one. But, there's basically 2 ways that I went about that. And one of them was that I'm very lucky, and I have 2 friends, one of whom is a childhood friend, one of whom is a friend of mine now, who, either are professional dancers, or in the case of my friend now, was a dancer when she was younger. And so they both had a lot of information to share. And in fact, my friend, Alison Cummings, who runs a dance company in Toronto now called Sore for Punching You, had a trajectory very much like Maeve's, where she moved from being a professional dancer to being an artistic director and a choreographer for her own company. And she shared some, gorgeous videos of herself creating work by herself at a residency, very much, like the one that Maeve goes to. And then the other thing that I was able to lean on is that we just have this wealth of information at our fingertips with the internet now. And I sort of can't even imagine what it was like to be a writer 50 years ago, when you would have really had to go to, for me, I would have had to go to a different city to sit in on professional dance classes, and see what that looks like. And now, you really, with a few keystrokes, so much is available to watch and learn from. So, I spent a lot of time watching, professional dancers doing their morning classes, doing their morning routines, whether that was, American Ballet Theatre or Alvin Ailey or, big companies. And that was super instructive for me as well, for sure.
And all the stretching and workouts that they have to do just to prepare for a performance, let alone the performance itself. So
yes, exactly.
Yeah. What's coming up next after the retreat? Do we know yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm working on something right now, but it's still pretty early days, so I don't talk about it very much. But it is really different in that, it's funny because I wrote the retreat, in first draft, I guess, mostly just before the pandemic. And then, we worked on new drafts all the way through 2020, or through half of 2020 anyway. And it's a very claustrophobic book, right? Because Maeve goes to this very secluded art center in the mountains. There are very few people there. They get trapped. So she's sort of trapped with, with very few people. Which I didn't plan, and as I said, I started it in 2019, so I could not have known, but it does sort of feel a little bit like a pandemic book as a result of that. And now what I'm writing has 2 different timelines, and what feels to me like a million characters to keep track of. So it's in short form, I would say it's about a trip to the wilderness that goes awry in the past, and the people trying to solve the mystery of what happened in the present.
Oh,
but yeah, it's very post-pandemic.
very
I think in that.
Right. Did you find in your own life in the pandemic we were still in, and we'll always talk about it, that things changed for you? Like, I know for me, just to interject, my attention span went down the pooper. I read 6 and 7 books at a time for my career, if you want to call it this, and 5 or 6 minutes each, and then I have to go to another one, and I can't keep track of movies we're watching or anything like that. So, same thing happened to you?
I found it's starting to get better now, but I found, especially through 2020, I really lost my ability to, exactly as you say, to pay attention in any kind of sustained way. And part of it was that, I just was really hooked into the news cycle. I read as much as I could about what was going on. And then I just didn't have it for anything else. I did watch some really good television. We're lucky to live in a golden age of television, because that was that's really good. There's some really good storytelling out there for sure.
Yep.
But I've had to really work at it. And part of what I've had to do is really pare back the amount of time that I can spend on social media. So in a year where I just released a book, that's really hard because there's a big expectation on me to be on social media promoting the book. But just in the last month or so, I've really stepped away in an effort to try and give myself a little bit more space for my mind.
Gotcha. And how about, let's go back a bit to when you're a youngster and in elementary school, grade school, high school. What kind of books did you read back then?
Oh gosh, I was always a really avid reader, and I just read everything, and often sort of just picked things off the shelf. So I've always loved mystery, of any kind, and I'll read, I love Sarah Waters and sort of the most complicated literary kind of mysteries, and I also love like Dick Francis, who was an Englishman who wrote these jockey mysteries, right?
Yep.
He had been a jockey, and so all the mysteries are horse track mysteries, and I love them. That sort of cozy mystery feel. But I really did read everything that I could get my hands on. So I read nonfiction and fiction and all sorts of novels all the time.
And they say that to be a writer, you have to be a reader as well. So I guess you found that out to be true as well.
I guess so. Yeah. I think that the biggest investment you can make in yourself as a writer is to read widely and read curiously, and to remember that when you're trying to work on some writing, so I tell students all the time that writing does not equal typing. And we often, all of us do this, right? Like, well, I want to write 500 words today. And then you're sort of pushing at yourself to do that. And some days that's going to be great. Like some days that's going to really flow. But some days the work of being a writer is actually doing some reading, doing some thinking, going for a long walk, allowing your mind to wander, and that's where I think tearing yourself away from Facebook or Instagram is really, really useful.
Now, do you have a set writing routine, or are you busy with all sorts of other stuff, so you have to kind of fit it in here and there?
Well, I'm pretty lucky now in that I mostly, I get to write not quite full time because I teach as well. But I don't have, a day job outside of my home. So what I do is that when I'm working, especially if I'm working on a first draft of a book, I prioritize the writing. And that means that's the first thing I do in the day. So my mornings I block off for writing. And then in the afternoon, or in the evening, I can do whatever I need to do in terms of teaching work or promotional work or any other freelance work I've taken on. But the first few hours of the day, I really try and prioritize for the work of writing.
And Elisabeth de Mariaffi is with us. If you're looking for books from her, The Retreat is her latest. Other one, The Devil You Know, Hysteria, How to Get Along with Women. We'll call you a professional writer because you are. What is the hardest lesson you think you had to learn along the way?
Years ago when I was finishing that MFA, or perhaps when I was just starting it, the writer Janice Kulik-Kiefer said once, quite offhand, that the sort of subsequent draft work, revising and rewriting, was the real work of the writer. And at the time I thought, look, I love a first draft, right? Because it's so imaginative and free, and that felt like the real work of being a writer. But I will say that 4 books later, she was entirely correct. And sometimes it's just a matter of getting whatever first draft down on a page so that you can actually dive into the real work of being a writer, which is sadly the rewriting, and it's just much harder.
Any tips on how to overcome the situation where perhaps people are walking around, they have a great idea in their head, and then they sit down and nothing happens? Any ways to overcome that, have you found? Or
Yeah, I think, sometimes people get stuck on that perfect first sentence. And I would always recommend, don't wait for that perfect first sentence, right? You get an idea in your head. It doesn't really matter what you get down on paper. You can write a paragraph that is literally the way you thought your idea up. Like when you're walking along, how did it occur to you in your head? It won't look like a story when you write that paragraph, but it will be something for you to then start to play with. The other thing that I often recommend is, like if you have an idea for a story and you have an idea for a character, just start writing from their point of view in some way. A letter that they're writing or some dialogue. And that can often be just enough to kind of kickstart some momentum. But don't wait for the muse or that perfect first sentence, because that might not come.
It might. And speaking of being a professional, from your viewpoint, tell us about, if you can, in general terms, like the contract system, royalty system, signing up with a publisher. How does all that work, or is it still kind of mysterious?
It's not really mysterious, but I've been very fortunate in that I have an agent. My agent is Samantha Haywood at Transatlantic, and I've had Sam as my agent since 2011. So I have never had to do any of that because I have this amazing agent who does that work for me, the work of submitting to publishers and helping to negotiate a contract. But I have also worked for publishers. On the other side of it, I've done publicity for independent publishers. So what I always do recommend to people, if you're submitting, is that the best thing for you to do is to send a query letter with about 20 pages of your manuscript to start off with, because that's easy enough for somebody to read quickly. And then if they like it, they will definitely ask you for more.
And there we go. That's the suggestion from the one who knows. I'm going to have to wrap it up here, but anything final you'd like to add to any would-be writers and or readers we're listening in?
No, I can't think of anything aside from, make sure that you're making time to read and make sure that you're making time to write every day, even if it's only for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth de Mariaffi. Look for her books, including The Retreat. If you're snowbound or sunbound, it's a good one for you. Elisabeth, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for hosting.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.